We've been joined by the American woman, whose name we have not been given. But today we're going to be looking at another very, very interesting piece of our world history. And I do go into a little bit of controversy today because the kingdom that we're going to look at, the sites were mainly destroyed by Islamic State in 2014. And then we then go down the line of looking at why our past is important, why our past has a worldwide importance from one site to another, and why we collectively, as an international community, have to make sure that history and archaeology is in some way protected away from even the nation states that this archaeology is associated with. So this is everything from past civilizations has a worldwide interest, albeit whether we're talking about the Inca through to um, any remains of the Yamon people in Japan, all the way through to the origins of the Aboriginal, all the way to ancient Egypt, and even to our very own Stonehenge. All of these have a bearing on the collective consciousness of our past. And what will stand out very much today is that if we can't learn from the past, then we're doomed to repeat those mistakes. And in the case of the Kingdom of Mari, that is very fortuitous for me to say that. So, if none of you have ever heard about the Kingdom of Mari, whenever you're typing this into the internet, it always comes up as the Kingdom of Mali in Africa. But the Kingdom of Mari, Mari, is in Mesopotamia, is in northwestern Mesopotamia, along the river Euphrates, going all the way into Syria. And Islamic State targeted this civilization and blew most, if not all, of the visible remains of this civilization to Kingdom Come. And now we're dealing with the aftermath. But much of the artifactual evidence from Mari civilization had been saved many years before by the French in their archaeological excavations associated with the Mari kingdom in the 1930s. So we've got evidence of the Mari people in the Louvre, Smithsonian, Pergamon Museum, the British Museum, and elsewhere. And it's that argument to have artifacts of importance in different museums and not to actually return them to the country of origin. So that's opposed to giving back, for example, the Benin bronzes to Nigeria, or is it? Because it's that long-ranging debate. If we give all these artifacts back to the countries of origin, then if that country has a war, those artifacts are destroyed and they go onto the open market. Then we've got no evidence of those civilizations existing. So that's a debate in itself, and I know that it's quite a vocal, controversial debate to be had. Now, this is, as we know, a cuneiform tablet. Well, some of you may know, but another fact that we might not know is that cuneiform script, if you want to call it that, cuneiform letters, are to be derived from as far back as 5,200 years ago and 5,500 years ago and beyond. And this type of pseudo alphabet, it's an alphabet of little characters that you can actually see little ticks that are stamped into clay, sometimes carved into stone. And the records that we've got in regards to the Kingdom of Mari are very different than most records that we might find associated with most cultures on this planet. In fact, we know so much about a certain king known as Zimri Lim. And actually, we did actually sit down and work out if it is pronounced Zimri Lim, and we worked out that yes, the great king of this kingdom, just under 4,000 years ago, was called Zimri Lim. And we've got letters from Zimri Lim to his wife, Shiptu, and we've got letters to his 8 children, all in a cuneiform script. So you can imagine, Dad, I could only write on one tablet this week because I had run out of space. So, but basically, that's what we're talking about. But those jokes aside, let's just give you a little bit more information about this world. And what we do find is up here, you've got these 2 localities, a place known as Tikar and Mari. And yes, we've worked out that it is actually pronounced Mari. We went in depth. And this is actually over the border in Syria. And this was the place that the despotic Islamic State decided to establish itself and to act for worldwide domination with the foundation of an Islamic State, which thankfully failed, because what the Islamic State wanted to do was they wanted to set back to year 0. In other words, anything that existed before Islamic State or anything that disagreed with their sense of Islam was to be destroyed, including Islam. They would destroy mosques that were Islamic. They would destroy churches that were Christian. They would destroy Roman temples. They would destroy anything that was didn't agree with what they were telling the world. And they felt they were right, and that's the point. You see, when sometimes you can, it's like being in a relationship, isn't it? That your partner might say, "Oh, those Picassos on the wall, I don't like them anymore. We're going to burn them in the garden." And the other person says, "Well, hang on, they're valuable." "Oh, they're not valuable." And then in 20 years' time, somebody comes along and says, "Those Picassos that you had on the wall, they're of international, worldwide importance. Forget about the money, and you've burnt them." So, what we need to start to think is collectively the value of our history, not the value of our history individually. And one thing that we do see with the Islamic State, these cuneiform tablets that I've got, the one behind me, the sites associated with the Mari kingdom were extensively looted, and the artifacts that were obtained were sold on the black market. Now, that seems quite hypocritical to me. Islamic State wants to destroy all these different cultures, but at the same time sell the evidence to the worldwide world and make money from it to buy arms. It just doesn't make any sense. So in other words, the actual foundations of what the Islamic State stood for are peppered with evil and are peppered with a sense of I don't know. It's a different area. It's a different thing altogether. So here we go. When you look at this map, you can start to see the words Babylon, associated with the kingdom of Babylon. And we go back again, and we look, for example, at the kingdom of Ur and Samaria down in the south. We look at the kings of Nineveh, which is another site that came up in 2014, also a site that was being extensively looted and destroyed by Islamic State in 2014. So, and Sippar, the kingdom of Sippar, we can see this on here. So lots of these names sort of ring a bell, and they very much ring a bell when I was very much involved in all this stuff in 2003 as well. So you've got two great rivers there, the Tigris River and the Euphrates River. Now along this stretch, all the way from the foothills of Turkey, all the way through, going through Mari, the modern day, the likes of Syria, and then further over towards the east, you've got the Kurdish, and then you go further on down, you've got Baghdad, and then you've got Babylon, and you go all the way down to the Gulf. So this is classed as Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia, if anyone has studied their First World War, they will read the words Mesopotamian Mandate or the division and repatriation and all these different words of Mesopotamia. And this sense of Mesopotamia is one of those landscapes that is definitely to be classed as the cradle of civilization, a cradle of civilization such as the Indus Valley people, a bit further over in towards India, and you've got the likes of the River Nile, and you've got these cradles of civilizations in lots of other places in the world, and Mesopotamia, this landscape, is a cradle of civilization. And why we're very much interested in Mari today is that there's so many different trigger points that will get you thinking, and very much I go along the damn right opinionated today, but then again, it's you'll find that in lots of things that I do these days. So this is a site at Mari, the home site to the Mari Kingdom. And none of that exists anymore. It's all been blown up, or it's all gone. It's all been flattened, and this is a tragedy. And there's one thing that I've not told you today. There's one thing that I've not intimated at all: the relevance of this site on what's going on today. And what that is quite simple. If some of you have been focusing on what this title was today, and I mentioned it last week. I mentioned the kingdom of Mari, King Zimri Lim, and a plague that hit the kingdom nearly 4,000 years ago. Approximately 3,700 odd years ago, 3,800 years ago. So a plague. And you know what? If I'd have taught this at the beginning of last year, and I had told you that this Zimri Lim knew about cleansing. He knew about burning people's effects if they've got diseases. He knew about isolation. He knew about all these different things. And he knew how to deal with an outbreak. He knew as soon as he heard that people were being infected by something the people of his kingdom didn't understand, he was isolating people to stop the spread. And you know what? We've got silly governments in the West that didn't learn. And if they had looked, yeah, this is highly politically charged. If they had looked at evidence from the past and had learned from the evidence of the past, they would have learned that lockdowns were nothing new. In fact, this guy locked down his state more or less straight away, and it stopped the death of tens of thousands of people. This is something we could have learned from, but you know what? We allowed the likes of Islamic State to destroy this site, which had cuneiform tablets that actually gave us solutions to modern day problems. This is why history and archaeology is more relevant than we can ever give it credit for. Events that we suffer from today, we've got solutions in the past, but we ignore them at our peril. This site itself, as we start, and as you can see, this is very highly charged today. The Royal Palace of Mari, which is underneath that used to be underneath that square thing in the middle, that's a roof. Site was being excavated from the 1930s. Was the royal residence of the rulers of Mari in eastern Syria. And this is an acting cradle of pseudo civilization, not just the Levant, not just Babylon and all the rest of it. This is the Mesopotamian city that became the city, that became a model. And the archaeology at this site, the remains of the archaeology at the site are still, well, were at something collapsing behind me. Hang on. Hang on a minute. My background collapsed. Oh God, happy days. Hang on a minute, silly things. Hang on, my background. There you go. La 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 la. Hang on. There you go. I could see Karen was warning me about that then. Thank you, Karen. Mari acted as the middleman. Mari would have been the place if it survived that would have been involved in the Silk Route. You know, it was the place to be. And this is a very powerful kingdom. It's a kingdom that we may never have heard of. I didn't really hear about it at all, except maybe a little bit of footage that I was looking at when Islamic State was blowing these sites up. Both the size and grand nature of the palace demonstrate the importance of Mari during its long history, over 1,000 years. 1,000 years of history this kingdom lasted, which is 750 years longer, if not more, than the British Empire lasted. The walls that I was talking about before my background collapsed, the walls that I was talking about are still, most of them were, up until 2013, 2014, were still this. Were all ground floor level, up to the height of the ground floor level. This is what we're talking about. In many ways, this site could be the archetypal site for the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Nobody really knows where the Hanging Gardens of Babylon were. It could have been the place where the Hanging Gardens of Babylon were. Flat roofs with palms and plants and green and water and cisterns and all the rest of it, flowering plants, bees and everything flying around. This was the place to be, right? The most intriguing thing is about this site, and the thing that we look more than anything are the 25,000 cuneiform tablets that have been excavated up until 2000, and excavations slowly started to cease in 2010, 2011, under the French, and then thousands have been stolen since. Now, this theft of the other cuneiform tablets that we don't know about could have actually told us other things. We've heard of Nostradamus, and we've heard of predictions, and we've heard of echoes from the past. Okay, well, let's forget Nostradamus. But the fact of the matter is, this is real events being recorded in real time on these cuneiform tablets. Real clues to how to deal with events that were occurring at the time, thousands of years ago. And unfortunately, lots of these things have now been stolen. But we do have these 25,000 cuneiform tablets, mainly thanks to Assad and his ability to keep them in Damascus safe throughout the Civil War. The royal palace itself was discovered in 1935, excavated with the rest of the city throughout the 1930s and beyond. Is considered one of the most important finds at Mari, the cuneiform tablets and the buildings themselves. And it was naturally, the civilization was discovered by André Parole in the 1930s. And these tablets themselves have been key tools to learn about this civilization. And the development of ancient Egypt and the likes of Babylon and what's going on in the east and in the north and in everywhere else. So these tablets themselves record events elsewhere. They're not just about Mari and just that one area. It sort of talks about that intercourse and exchange between civilizations. Thousands of these clay tablets have assisted us to understand lots and lots more. And as soon as the Syrian government were aware of the Islamic State and the what was happening, they took wagon loads of military vehicles out of Mari. On the backdrop of that, the Islamic State moved in. And there are actually archaeologists who actually put their lives on the line to defend the archaeology. It's the same as what was happening in the Second World War when the American army was heading towards Pompeii. There were one or two archaeologists at Pompeii who were actually standing on the walls with weapons to defend Pompeii against the onslaught of the Americans and them looting the site of Pompeii. And these archaeologists and myself and lots of us have the same idea, that archaeology is not just about us, is not just about our discoveries. Archaeology is about understanding and something to learn from. One of the things that we missed it because we weren't in this category. Lots of people who sat at home and did nothing throughout the pandemic. Those lazy furlough people who just sat around doing nothing. We were out learning about history and archaeology. But some people who were out there, they were reading books on history. They're reading books about archaeology. Now, they wouldn't have these books about history and archaeology if archaeologists hadn't given us that information in the first place. Even these little nuances make history and archaeology very, very relevant. Discovery of the tablets also aided in the labeling of various rooms in terms of their purpose and function. So you have tablets in some rooms, you can tell exactly what they were used for. You don't usually get that on archaeological sites mainly. So there was a continuous plundering of the site from 2014, 2015, as early as 2013 actually. And what we do find is that we managed to save enough before Islamic State actually got there. So we're talking about one of the great leaders of this state. Just to sort of make sure I got my dates here, a chap by the name of Zimri Lim. And Zimri Lim he reigned between the year 1775 to 1761. And at the end of that date, 1761, his kingdom was conquered by the kingdom of Babylon. Interesting enough, the kingdom of Babylon. And so, in other words, what we've got this kingdom itself of Zimri Lim that really establishes itself on the court of international politics and international war and international understanding. So what I'd like to do now is do the controversial bit. So what we can see is these upstanding walls in the lower part of the screen with these excavations. And what you can see underneath this are those walls of buildings that still stand keep having to correct myself, were the buildings that stood until 2013, 2014. So again, to put it into its sense of landscape, what we do find is that you've again, this makes it a little bit easier to understand, where you've got the Zagros Mountains towards the right going into Iran. Anybody coming over the Zagros Mountains would be into this Garden of Eden. And that's what Mesopotamia is. It is the Garden of Eden of civilization, of development, of rivers, of everything, of pyramids and all the rest of it. Yes, the first pyramids we're seeing within this landscape are not ancient Egypt. And again, it puts it at the axle of the world. Now, this is the route that you're going to come through. You're going to go to Zagros Mountain. You're going to probably go to Nineveh, Nimrud, which isn't on here, and then try and go across some of these deserts, over to Damascus, maybe go north to the kingdom of the Hittites, go much further north to the Black Sea, and maybe over to the west as well into the Mediterranean. Now, look at that. Full height buildings, you can tell that from the doorways. Buildings, these walls themselves take us back in excess of 4,500 years. We most of what we do see dates from the leadership of the Lim dynasty, which is the dynasty of King Zimri Lim of the Mari Kingdom. So we take us to roughly 1770s year BC, which is 3,770 odd years ago. But these buildings themselves, you can see the doorways there. Doorways. You can see where there would have been beam slots there going into the first floor level above. And all gone. It doesn't exist anymore. It's all been blown up. Now, the reason why the international community, politics again, a couple of apologies, but you don't get anything done unless you be controversial. The reason why the international community hasn't put tens of millions of pounds back at this site to try and save some of it is because it's made of mud brick. Mud brick does not sell tickets. Palmyra sells tickets, the wonderful Roman Hellenistic earlier site of Palmyra that was all blown up by Islamic State, that sells tickets, right? This Nineveh, that sells tickets. Okay, the great great Sphinx beasts that you find at Nimrud and Nineveh, yeah, that's all stone, lots of mud brick, but stone. That sells tickets. This site doesn't sell tickets, but this site has some wonderful clues to aiding us in future times, just down to the cuneiform tablets that we've been excavated at the site, thanks to the French mission and their wonderful excavation work. Now, I'm just going to double check something. Oh yeah, there you go. On the left, 2010, on the right, 2012. This photograph has been taken, I think, in 2020, actually. It's gone. There would be a way of preserving this, but it would need a lot of investment. Get the Chinese on board on this. They'd be able to deal with this with their engineers and all the rest of it. Build a huge hangar over it and try and put it together. But this is not what people are interested in Palmyra. Though that there are the holes that have been dug around the site. There are thousands and thousands of holes that have been dug around the site to obtain those. The military, the United States military footage of this actually shows them as a surface of the moon, basically. And this is itself, the damage that's actually been caused. Do you know what I'd like to do is actually just share you a bit of a screen, right? And just sort of go off on the right tangent. Actually, this is a little bit of an article. This is some of the artifacts. This was the Museum of the Mosaics itself, which has been heavily bombed. What would happen is that there you go, the Museum of the Mosaics, and they managed to get lots of these things out into Damascus, and artifacts out of Aleppo into Damascus as well, to save them, to keep them safe. And all these wonderful gems and trade items and gold and so on, all that being boxed up and saved before Islamic State got in there. But we in the West can be said to be responsible for the destruction of some of these sites as well, targeting some Syrian museums and so on, damaging worldwide history and archaeology. So going back to where we were again, and I will apologise for possibly being maybe over the top with my politics today, but again, I'm trying to put a message out there on how important this history and archaeology is. Destruction of the ancient site of Mari in Syria. The ancient city was one of the first archaeological sites to be occupied by Islamic State. Oh God, hang on, I've got somebody who's just knocking the door. Oh my God, hang on, I'll be back. Oh God. Hello? What's that? Okay, cheers, mate. Look after yourself and collect it in a bit. Take care, mate. Bye. Bye-bye. Bye. Oh my God. Flippin' heck! I can't believe what that was at the door. I can't believe it. Bags of straw. Bags of straw. Anyway, back to where we were. Right, sorry about that. Right, so what we're finding now is the Syrian government, who is thankfully back in control of these sites, is actually looking at the costs and photographing the damage. And Assyrian Antiquities Directorate have been releasing images like the one you're actually looking at. And outside Syria, the news about the destruction of the Kingdom of Mari has received fairly limited to no press attention. I've never seen a press release about Mari. I'm sure I would have, except in France. And the French were the ones who were very much into excavating the site. And they've been excavating the site all the way from the early 1930s, all the way into about 2010, 2011. But unfortunately, the work of the French archaeologists there starting to slowly come to an end in 2010 and 2011, thanks to the activities of the growing unrest in connection with the Arab Spring. In light of the level of damage that's been occurred since 2013, 2014, moreover, perhaps it's worth sparing a moment to look at why Mari matters to archaeologists. This is what I'm trying to say. Why archaeology matters, not just this site. Why archaeology matters not just to the Syrians, but to all of us. So when Islamic State emerged in the part of Deir ez-Zor province, in which Mari lies, was one of the first areas to fall under its control in early 2014. They had their eye on it in 2013. That's why the Syrian government went there and tried to empty whatever they could into military vehicles to try and get them to Damascus. Under IS, the site suffered an immediate, instant explosion of looting. Satellite images revealing the change from archaeological site to lunar landscape. That's what we're seeing there in a matter of months. More than, wait for it, 1,500 new looting pits were recorded at Mari between late 2013 all the way into 2015, likely representing the removal of a huge quantity of ancient objects sold into the illegal antiques market to fund ISIS and its war. Now, again, it's not just artifacts. It's not just anonymous artifacts out of the ground and we're going to sell them and we're going to get them back in museums. When an artifact's taken out of the ground, it's lost its context. So, for example, you might get a cuneiform tablet like the one behind me in a specific room, and basically it says this is a letter from so and so, and it's describing how wonderful my house is, and I got bees on the roof and so on. And you're thinking, well, we don't know where this cuneiform tablet comes from. We don't know which room it's come from. We don't know what this means. We don't know the context anymore. We actually don't know the context of the date of the artifact anymore. We don't know what this means in regards to Zimri Lim's plague nearly 4,000 years ago. What does all this mean? And this is unfortunately the effects of taking archaeology out the ground without having any care or thought for the meaning. It's not just a financial meaning, these artifacts. It's actually got a real meaning. It's got a real context. The word context. But this is not only to be seen in the absence of interest with this site. This is to be seen in the overall interest with many thousands of archaeological sites across the world. This is now a common story to many archaeological sites across the world, even in Great Britain. And when the pandemic was going on, metal detector enthusiasts were targeting archaeological sites because there weren't people in English heritage and Scottish heritage looking after them to keep an eye on these sites. So people were actively looting these sites. So we can't just look at these countries. We've got to look at our own in our own backyard. For archaeologists, Mari itself, and this is a big statement, Mari itself is one of the most important sites so far excavated for those who wish to understand the Mesopotamian world, the Bronze Age Mesopotamian world, and the great sprawl of an urban centre. We've looked at Cattle Hayek, and we've looked at the flat roofs of Cattle Hayek and a small and a relatively small sort of town, but the really early urban area, for example, in Turkey. But this is one of those urban areas itself, one of the tight-knit urban areas where you've got everything functioning as a proper institution, and Mari was home to an extraordinary palace. This is the thing that archaeologists focus on most with the site. And the earliest major structure dates from as back as 4,500 years ago. Let's have a little look at that image again. Let's not get too depressed by looking at an image with craters. Again, looking at that wonderful image in front of us there, getting into that room, getting an idea of this wonderful site itself. This palace itself being continually sort of added to into the reign of the last great leader Zimri Lim of the Mari kingdom. You've got bits of restoration there, preservation. They roofed over it, which is the right thing to do. If this type of site was found in Britain, they wouldn't have bothered putting a roof over it, and it would have eroded away and it would have lost it forever. However, this site itself provides a unique opportunity to walk through a Mesopotamian palace, or did, standing almost to its roof beams. Ground floor, first floor, roof beams. Amazing. It was. And very badly damaged as a statement today. Its protective roof was compromised. The security situation at that time left it impossible to make repairs, but the recently released photographs show the large parts of the palace 2-meter thick walls have all collapsed or been deliberately blown up, destroyed, looting, and so on. And it's the archaeologist that last excavated it, a certain Pascal Butterlin, tells us that the work that she directed up until the end of 2010 believes such a level of destruction suggests that explosives, either ground-based or more likely from airstrikes, were probably involved. At this point, I go off onto another tangent. If this site was also destroyed by airstrikes, I do know that Islamic State did not have an air force. So therefore, we in the West are also responsible for the active destruction of this archaeological site. Again, we have not learned from history. We've decided to bomb the hell out of the site, and at the same time destroying a major part of the culture of the world. And do you know what? Some people argue that I'm more interested in archaeology and history than am in human life. I was definitely more interested in the archaeology and history when the Iraq War was on, and I got in a great deal of trouble for it. And what I was trying to say at the time, if we lose a sense of people's identity, they've got nothing to come back to. And this is exactly what the Iraqis have been saying to this day. The damage. They were so appalled with what ISIS was doing to the sites of Nimrud and Nineveh in the north of Iraq. They were saying, look, whether we can wrestle this land back from Islamic State, which they did, if they're destroying our identity, we've got no identity. Without this, we've got no identity. And it's exactly what Islamic State was trying to do, destroy these people's identity. But it didn't work. It didn't work completely because Islamic State did the stupid thing and allowing these artifacts to be sold on the open market, and in doing saving a tiny bit of the cultures that they were trying to destroy. And it's a in many ways it was the failings of the Nazis in the Second World War. They tried to wipe out Gypsy culture, the Jewish culture, and all these other cultures. But what they didn't do was to destroy everything. For example, a few years ago, I was offered some items of clothing which had been stockpiled by the Nazis, and I was looking at thinking these are really nice cultural objects, and I didn't end up buying any of them because I thought it was really eerie that these were being worn by somebody. And an hour later, this person was shot or put into a gas chamber, and I just couldn't go ahead with it. But the fact of the matter is, those items of clothing have survived. A person's culture and identity has survived by those items of clothing. So the Nazis failed. The Nazis did fail. Islamic State failed as well. But now the after effect in trying to preserve and trying to bring attention to this archaeology is now the challenge that we've now got to go into now. So if we look at again back to this image, and we don't get as depressing at the end of this as you probably all feel at this moment. For archaeologists and historians, Mary's Royal Palace is more famous in its later form. It's more famous for those events that were occurring in the reign of Zimri Lim, the Lim dynasty, from into the 1,700 years BC, 3,700 years ago, throughout the Lim dynasty, and basically they're reworking of the site. And what we do find is we get a massive idea of what life was like in this palace because of the cuneiform tablet that survived. We've almost got a complete picture because we've got the buildings. Let's think. We've got the building walls that you walk through. And you've got cuneiform tablets telling you what was done in that room, and telling you what plants were in the corner, and telling you what people ate, telling you about the colours on the walls, telling you about the people coming into these rooms. And you can close your eyes and you can get a full picture of what happened 3,700 to 3,800 years ago. This is what those cuneiform tablets tell us: the functioning of a Bronze Age city-state. You know what was going on in the Mari world because of these cuneiform tablets. There's no doubt about it. Love letters between Zimri Lim and his wonderful wife Siptu. Wonderful wife Siptu, because she was the one who told her husband, look, I've got two people with sores on their wrists, okay, and they're bleeding. They got lesions, and they're bleeding, and what I've done, I've isolated them. And then the king gets this and he panics, and somebody else has these signs of some kind of disease. We'll go into a lot more detail in a short while. And he said, right, we're gonna have a shutdown. We're gonna lock down the country. We're going to isolate people. We're going to leave food outside their door, and we're going to nail them shut into their homes. A bit like what happened in China. But what happened in China worked. We didn't learn from that in the West. We still allowed people to circulate, and so on and so on. And we didn't learn from these things that we learnt and read in the cuneiform tablets, but the archaeologists didn't convince people of the importance of this site. And now it's too late. So you've got the great preservation of the architecture. You've got 300 rooms at the site. 25,000 cuneiform tablets recovered through the excavations, mostly dating from this time. So we've got a complete picture. It's like finding a full archive of the royal family from between 1953 all the way through to now, and being able to put together from photographs and descriptions. Obviously, they didn't have photographs back then, but putting descriptions, the Buckingham Palace would have a pretty good picture. And this is what we're saying with the Kingdom of Mari. The texts preserved on the tablets have left us the names of the rulers of Mari. A lot more than in ancient Egypt. We're still trying to put ancient Egypt together. What ancient Egypt did? They would have a leader that they didn't like, and they would scrub the memory of that ancient leader from everything, right? You find a body in the ground with a little name, and you're trying to fit her in. Well, what they did in Mari, lots of the leaders that were unpopular, they kept the cuneiform tablets, and they said, well, it's a record, isn't it? We'll keep it there. And it's so important, and there's something else to be learnt as well there. And we're not going to spell it out, but there are characters in modern day society whose name we're expunging from the records. And we destroy what they produced, but they were still part of the fabric of society. In the 1980s, there were some characters who have been now completely disgraced, but they were part of my childhood, and we're now no longer allowed to talk about these people. And the thing is, in the world of Zimri Lim, all those records about earlier leaders were kept. They weren't destroyed. They kept their history, and this is what is really important. Very similar to what was happening with Pictish civilization. We could have learned a lot more from that last week when we looked at Pictish civilization. That we see Pictish art on the one side of the stone, and we see Christianity on the other side of the stone. Instead of scrubbing away the Pictish art, they kept the Christian stuff, right? The Christian stuff was kept. At the start again, they kept the pagan stuff and they put the Christian stuff on the front. They didn't get rid of it. They didn't scrub out the pagan stuff. They kept the Christian stuff, right? We could have learned from that. You can't expunge history. You shouldn't expunge history. It's part of our identity. It's the same as chucking statues into Bristol. They're part of our history. You shouldn't remove these statues. And people say you should remove these statues so that we just ignore that slavery ever happened. And when we ignore slavery ever happened, we can all go around happily and we can never be reminded of it. Right? That is wrong. That is the wrong way of looking at history. History is always with us, and it's going to be always with us. And it's the same as what the Germans have done. They've tried to expunge every single reference to the Third Reich, all the buildings and so on, get rid of the swastikas and all the rest of it. And that's wrong. People should be reminded of their past. And this is important that we actually learn from the past. The cuneiform tablets tell us of the great wealth of the city and its people, and open an exceptional window on the politics and diplomacy of ancient Near East. So we know about royal letters between the kings of Mari and rulers of neighboring kingdoms, because cuneiform text was a bit like English today. Most governments use English in one form or another. Most governments communicate, except the EU. That's the thing. The EU is going to get rid of English now as the language of communication, and now it's going to be French. But back in the world of Zimri Lim, cuneiform text was not only something that was used over 4,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago. It was a text still used into the periods that followed after the death of Jesus Christ, and then cuneiform wasn't used. But that's not bad. A form of writing was used for 3,000 years, and I think that's brilliant. Ruling Mari wasn't an easy job. The city was surrounded by more powerful kingdoms and beset by frequent internal troubles. And obviously, what we find through the cuneiform, we can maybe find the king somewhere, but we know there are certain king reigning before Zimri Lim, a certain Jagged Lim, was killed by a servant. That's good. We know that from the cuneiform. We know there another king, a Yahadun Lim, was assassinated by his own son, who in turn was also assassinated after a reign of just 2 years. Now, and all those little bits of things sort of give you an idea of the chronology of the kings. It's great. The best known king being of Mari Zimri Lim, a contemporary of the mighty Hammurabi of Babylon, the great sort of leader of the kingdom of Babylon. And one thing about Zimri Lim is also this, we think about Hywel and we think about Hywel as this great leader in Wales in the 840s in North Wales, and he ruled over Wales. And we talk about the laws of Hywel and we talk about how just they were to the people of Wales, and how women were treated, and all the rest of it. And the Hywel Code was used up until about the 1530s, 1536 actually. Before the Act of Union between England and Wales, and we talk about that. We take it for granted, and actually, this leader Zimri Lim, he had a law code as well, quite a just law code, but nobody knows about it. And so we can talk about certain people in history, but we don't talk about other people in history, and there's not that level playing field. Look at that wonderful statue there. This is a statue of one of those great Lim leaders of this world, going back nearly 3,800 years ago. This is the leader known as Ishtuplim, emerging from the palace throne room in 1936, being excavated by the French. A wonderful statue there of a leader whose name we can place, and the name this individual wandered through the palace. Through the palace rooms, the 300 rooms that we've seen images of. This guy touched those walls. You used to be able to walk down the corridors, walking in the same footsteps of this leader, who we've got a statue of. We know he walked down the corridors because we've got his cuneiform tablets. It's that wonderful link with history. Zimri Lim, whose father also seems to have been assassinated by an untrustworthy servant, managed to wrestle Mari back from a rival royal house. Now, Zimri Lim, this great guy who managed to get sort of the kingdom Mari back, and again, I'll remind you, it is pronounced Mari. We've Shiptu. She is pronounced Shiptu, is his wife. Zimri Lim is pronounced Zimri Lim, and he married a princess from the kingdom of Yamad. Again, I've never heard of Yamad, another kingdom where modern day Aleppo is. So we've got a map that's going to come up as well, the kingdom of Yamad. And we know about his wife because we've got the love letters from her. And you know what? We've got the letters from Ship 2 telling the king about this outbreak, this terrible thing that was affecting two of her servants, and that sense of isolation and that sense of cleansing, and leaving the person's food outside the door, and then she collects the food of another palace room, and then when she puts the plates outside, you burn the plates. All these wonderful things, cleansing. And we know about his daughters because we've got letters between his daughters and the king. Now his grown-up daughters, the cuneiform letters survive to illustrate a close and fond fatherly relationship. And you know what? That's very different from any other kingdom. If you go to ancient Egypt, can you imagine a pharaoh writing love letters to his children and his wife? It just didn't happen. Except I am correctly reminded that it happened under the reign of Akhenaten, right? Where he did have a sense of connectedness with his family. 200 years after this leader, We know that, but that's the only example I can say from the ancient Egyptian pharaohs. The kingdom of Zimri-Lim and the kingdom of Mari was something that well, I tell you what, we probably know more about the kingdom of Zimri-Lim if we looked at all the cuneiform tablets, if we had managed to save them all, than probably big chunks of anywhere on the planet. If we really study this culture, we'd know more about this culture than ancient Egypt, and that's quite an ask, right? But 25,000 tablets do not lie. We could learn so much, but unfortunately, so much has been destroyed. And what I'm going to do is, and we're going to go back to those other images, but you can see this wonderful landscape. Yamhan, where Shiptu came from, Mari, the kingdom of Mari, and the great city of Tekar, which is also part of the kingdom of Mari. And you've got the kingdom of Elam, Babylonia. There you go. And you've got the obviously the Canaanite kingdom coming in there. Byblos. You're talking about all these sort of names in the Bible, and we mentioned Palmyra as well. Going all the way up to the Hittites and so on, and peoples whose names, the Hurrians, ever heard of them? And the Kizuwatna people. But again, it's looking at this and trying to put all this in context. We've obviously all heard about the Babylonians. We've heard about that from our Sunday school classes and the Bible. So again, looking a little bit more, Zimri-Lim was less successful in its relationship with Hammurabi, who was the great king of Babylon. After being an ally of Babylon in its wars with Elam, which you can see there on the map, and the city-state of Larsa, the diplomatic relationship between Zimri-Lim and Hammurabi of Babylon gradually soured, culminating in the Babylonian army being dispatched to conquer Mari in 1761. How do we know? Well, we know that from the Babylonians. How do we know? From the years before, we know about this war. How do we know that suddenly no more cuneiform tablets associated with Zimri-Lim are now found associated with the palaces of Mari? It's impossible to tell how much more of this history may have been hacked out of the ground by the ISIS-sponsored looters, written on tablets, which were sold to fund the fighting. And the great tragedy is that you were able to read the cuneiform tablets in order. Let me show you what I mean. Let me show you what I mean. Hang on, let's get the other. Look at that there. So you can imagine that the ones excavated on the top are probably newer, and the ones below are older. So if you take somebody from IS and they take one of these out of the ground, then it loses its age context. And so to be able to read these in chronology is very much more difficult. These were like stored on racks, and there's something else interesting as well. In defeat, the victors do not vanquish in the same way. Zimri-Lim disappeared from the historical records when his city fell. Fair enough. Presumably because he didn't survive the encounter, but his palace did survive along with the records of his 14-year reign. Now that is interesting. And why that is interesting? The Babylonians were not the people of the Bible. The Babylonians were sensible people. They conquered the city and they did not set light to the palace. They did not destroy the records. They were far greater than Alexander the Great in what he was doing with some of the cities that he captured in Iraq. And when you think about it, that's interesting. That's really subtle. That you've got the Babylonians, they conquer the city, but they allow all the records to survive. They allow the palace to survive. Really interesting, that. The palace constructed by the kings of Mari was of unusual magnificence. We know that. We not only know that from the surviving walls, we find that from the artifacts. We also know that from the diplomatic texts and other writings in elsewhere from the Babylonians and the Egyptians writing about these people as well. It was famous in its day as one of the largest and most luxurious royal palaces in existence, the envy of other rulers. Now, this is where the Hanging Guards of Babylon bit comes in. I can say it's the Hanging Guards of Babylon because we don't know where it was. But we know the Hanging Guards of Babylon existed many, many years ago. The huge courtyards were planted with palm trees, and the walls of the palace were painted with elaborate scenes and decorated designs. Let's have a little look at one of those. Let's go back a little bit. Hang on, there we go. Look at these beautiful paintings on the wall there. These designs actually surviving. Obviously, now being placed on display. I think these are probably in store in Damascus, but you can get an idea of some of their works. Very ochre, very tin background type wash on there, maybe a bit of a whitewash. You can see the palms there. You can see a bit of a representation of the palace and the people in the palace there. But again, very important that we've got these surviving as well. So we've got an idea of colour as well, not just the cuneiform. So in other words, maybe they did have photographs. This is their photographs of the day. So, you know, back to that thing about when I mentioned about Buckingham Palace disappeared. We've got all the photographs, we've got all the texts about Buckingham Palace for the past 80 odd years or whatever. And it's the same with this civilization. We can reconstruct the world, give us an idea. So these walls of the palace were painted with elaborate scenes and decorated designs, including a large fresco showing the investiture of Zimri-Lim as king, now displayed in the Louvre in France. The palace's chapel contained a life-size statue of a goddess, which was drilled through so that real water could run from the mouth of the vase held in the goddess's hands. Sadly, the palace chapel and all the royal reception rooms are now a mass of huge looter pits. It's criminal. Given the wonders of the Palace of Mary and the importance of this site, it's disappointing that the destruction of the palace and the plundering of the site in search of tablets and other saleable objects hasn't received more attention. The first explanation is that cultural destruction in the Middle East has been so widespread in recent years that it's ceased to be newsworthy in all but the most extreme cases, which is a depressing thought. A second disadvantage Mary has over more high-profile sites such as Palmyra is that its buildings were made of mud and not the classical stonework which produces photogenic ruins and screams its architectural and artistic worth to a general audience. Nevertheless, Mary deserves to be considered as a loss on the same scale as any of the more celebrated sites to have suffered during the ISIS conflict. If this had been in Germany, it had been reconstructed, like all those wonderful buildings and towns that have been reconstructed in Germany since the Second World War. But because this is in the Middle East, we don't give it any credence or basis. After the break, we're going to look at the background associated with Zimri-Lim, and we're going to go through a bit of a story which tells you about the cuneiform tablets, tries to put them into context, and that's what we're going to do after the break. So what I think I should do, what I want to do is some articles of the week, but I would also like to see if there's any questions. But before we actually do that, I'm just going to try to get us up to date with some of these images. So let's just go back again. So we've obviously got this wonderful statue of Ishtup of the Kingdom of Mary, and this itself is one of the very fine. This is actually shell, and this has been put together as two fingers. Probably this probably dates to the period of our wonderful Zimri-Lim. And you can see a nice little bit of detail there. You can get an idea of the typical sort of Assyrian type beard with the figure on the left, and this individual with a bit of a shaven head, and also something else as well, the representation with this shell, that you can actually see the eyes being sort of, you can see this sort of when we looked at, I think we were looking at what civilization we were looking at recently, and you had these sort of oblong, sort of triangular, sort of really deep eyes, and yeah, culture after culture, you sort of see this portrayal. And again, that's the great Zimri-Lim. Zimri-Lim with some ambassadors from other worlds visiting him to give tribute to him being the great king of the kingdom of Mari, and this sort of smacks at African, European, and you've got the great bull there as well, Minoan, and you've got that sense of culture. And maybe one word I haven't used at this juncture is the cosmopolitan world that is Mari, that interchange of not the West and the East. That concept is a later concept, but more interchange between cultural exchange that we actually see at the top of the Euphrates here. And there it is. There's our Mari, putting this into sort of context, and the great sort of Arabian desert a little bit further south there, that sort of great landscape. And our obviously wonderful paintings that we've also described as out there, with the wonderful figures in sort of ornate rooms, and griffin-like beasts, sphinx-like beasts on either side, and you can get an idea of the palm trees, again give you an idea of color and sense, and obviously one more of those cuneiform tablets from this array of cuneiform tablets in the room. So what we're going to do now, and actually one of you have missed, I need to tell Chris about next week as well, don't I? You all missed me to tell Chris. I need to let Chris know as well. So what I'm going to do now is, what we shall do is yes, I'm having a blonde moment there. Let's have a break. Right, talking about blonde moments, what I would like to do now is I would like to field questions, and what I would like to do is some nice articles of the week, and then we'll have a nice break, and then we'll have a shorter session afterwards, if that's okay with everybody. Let's go with Goff. Jeffrey.
Godfrey, please. No questions. Very
Do you know what?
Never heard of Mari or Zimri Lim, but great, very good.
And the strange thing is, thank you for that. We took great efforts to try and work out how to pronounce Zimri Lim, and we did everything. You know, you get these things online, how to pronounce something, and it was just like that's all we had. So yes, thank you.
Child after him.
What's that?
I'm going to name my next child after him.
Zimri Lim. Oh, that'd be quite good. At least I tell you what, it'll be based on a great leader.
Yeah.
Hang on, isn't your son called Alexander the Great?
Yeah.
I thought so. And your one of your daughters is called Catherine the Great, isn't she?
Yes.
I think that's right. Right. Okay, Algernon.
No questions yet.
Right. Okay, Keithy babes.
Have all these cuneiform tablets been found in the same area? Like, was it a library or something? Do they have any idea of what it was?
Different rooms, individual rooms. This is why we're able to work out what the different rooms are. They're spread out around the site. But I would say that the big stash that we've seen would be in regards to the library, where they would be stacked. And it's just like it's a bit strange, isn't it? We're going to get Zimri Lim's letter to his wife shipped to him, and we're going to read it, and it's just like, that is there. The subtleties of that. You wouldn't find that in ancient Egypt. It's not present in that sort of context.
Jolly good.
Right, so talking about the numpties, let's have the numpties in, please. Karen Numpty.
Right. Yeah, I just muted us again then. Sorry, how many rooms did you say were in the palace?
300.
300. Right, thanks.
It sounds very similar to the great palace complexes of the Minoan civilization, which is not far away. So we're talking about the Minoan civilization and the collapse of the Minoan civilization around 3,600 years ago. And then what we then is actually quite contemporary. So you've got these large palace complexes. The Egyptians go into these large palace complexes as well. And so do some of the other civilizations nearby. So, yeah. Anything else?
Jim wants to know, has anybody ever done a reconstruction of the palace as it would have looked?
Not that I'm aware of. And what we need is a reconstruction for Jim to do for us next week.
Nice little project for Jim.
Jim, a full reconstruction with all 300 rooms and a statue of Zimri Lim by next week. He could do it with matchboxes.
Oh.
Yeah, Lego.
Lego, yeah.
Exactly. let go or Lego. And it's got to be a full-size representation as well. Jane, glorious Jane, you next.
No, it was all completely new to me, so very interesting. Just to say that I've got an appointment, so I won't be coming back after the break.
But you can. I tell you. So when you've got to go, we'll do
Half
articles
12.
of the week from Aginon. Okay, so we all know what's going on next week. Articles of the week. There you go. And let's put me on. You know, you all like to see. There you go. So we've got that little bit of a burial there, and its burial site exposes earliest signs of grief. The oldest human burial site to be discovered in Africa has shed light on the origins of our sense of grief. Is this no surprise? The Stone Age grave was dug in a cave in what is now Kenya, and the body dates to 78,002 years ago and 4 months and 3 hours, long before modern humans reached Western Europe. Its occupant, a girl aged about 3, appears to have been tightly wrapped in a shroud, and the earliest known instance of a body being prepared in such a manner. Lucy also appears to have had her head placed on a pillow. Earlier human graves dating to about 1,200 years ago have been found in Israel, but have not contained bodies laid to rest in such a careful fashion. So, like that one, thank you for that, Algernon. Conquistadors not guilty of great dying. Oh, this is controversial. Yes, I haven't seen this one. The indigenous people of South America suffered a population collapse hundreds of years before European conquistadors arrived on the continent in the early 1500s, a study has suggested. Oh, God, this changes everything. For years, historians have believed that Spanish and Portuguese colonists prompted what is now known as the Great Dying, in which up to 95% of the people of the Amazon basin were wiped out, some say as estimates of 200 million people. However, scientists at Reading University and Florida Tech have found evidence to suggest that the tribes had already been in decline for up to 602 years and 4 months. The researchers whose work is published in the journal Science found evidence that cultivated land had been abandoned and reclaimed by the rainforest 300 to 600 years before the Spanish conquistador Francisco del Arala became the first European to travel down to the Amazon in 1541. But we discussed that. Well, I know we discussed that. I know we did that. We were talking about other cultures and civilizations existing before the Spanish got there. It is thought that at one time 5 million people lived in the Amazon region. Well, that's a lot less than the hundreds of millions that we're told. But the new research indicates that these societies started to decline on the 14th of August in the year AD 950. The scientists assessed, well, in other words, what they're saying is that the conquistadors are not to blame for what happened. Of course they bloody are. Evil Spanish people. Viking used camp to launch raids on Picts. A massive camp of the Viking Great Army discovered on a Northumbrian hilltop is the first physical evidence for the chronicler's account of raids against the Picts by the Norse commander, Halfdan the Half. The 49-hectare site in the Coquette Valley was identified by archaeologists after metal detectors found game encounters, coins, and a statue of Lloyd George, typical of Viking encampments. According to excavators, the discoverers appeared to confirm written accounts of Halfdan the Half ravaging the territories of the Picts and the Britons of Strathclyde. So they believe that they found the site that was used in 875 years AD. So we got a nice little nice little another article there where they're showing a bit of the coastline associated with this. Bible began new chapter for Native American tongue. A 400-year-old copy of the Bible that served as a key to reviving a dead language is a bittersweet document for members of the Wapanongi tribe. The Elliott Indian Bible ooh, you can't call them Indians anymore, which is about to go on display at the Box Museum in Plymouth, was instrumental in bringing back a Native American tongue unspoken for 150 years before John Eliot, an English missionary, set down the translation in the 1660s to the Wampanoag language existed only in a spoken form. Now that's interesting. The Wampanoag are associated with the Wampanoag were the people that we mentioned associated with that place that we did a few weeks ago. The Roanoke, yes, they were on that map. I'm sure they were. For tribal elders, it is also a symbol of the harm that befell their people when the European settlers established themselves in New England after traveling from Plymouth on the Mayflower. So finally, people are acknowledging the damage that the West did these people. And it's not just about slavery in the 1700s. Hostilities known as King Philip's War ended bloodily in 1676 as the English military triumphs over the Native Americans were given little choice but to adopt Christianity. And this Bible itself, for the Wampanoag tribe to live peacefully, they were pressed into conversion and assimilating to the English way of living. After King Philip's War, if you were considered a threat in any way, you were sent away and sold into slavery. It's not all about people from Africa after all. We've got more items about Viking army inspired fabric of modern England. Oh, here we go. This is an interesting one. Archaeology threat. We are dismayed at the news that the University of Sheffield's renowned Department of Archaeology is under threat of closure. This and similar concerns at the University of Chester raise the prospect of diminishing archaeological courses, despite the UK's leading position in the discipline and a national shortage of archaeologists. We are former staff or students at Sheffield's department and would draw attention to the innovation of its research and teaching, combined with a highly successful agenda for widening access into the discipline. Archaeology is an unusual status in that it bridges the sciences and social sciences. Sheffield staff have embraced these opportunities, and as a result, its graduates have made a broad impact, populating facilities worldwide. We urge the university to champion the department as its crucial juncture. This is a key chance to enhance access to the subject at a time when the value of heritage has never been more apparent. Signed by a number of very eminent archaeologists there. Yes. Professor Barker, prehistorian, Professor Renfrew, another prehistorian, lots of them there. And what I might do is just this one, a century on dig unearths Chinese history. A trove of ivory and bronze artifacts used in sacrificial ceremonies 3,002 years ago could reshape the understanding of early Chinese civilization. Archaeologists on a site in the southwest of Sichuan believe that newly found treasures linked to the Bronze Age society of the Sakawadu people appeared to have confirmed that it was distinct from those in the Central Plains. Discovery this year of a gold mask with wide eyes, a tall nose, what the hell is that? And pierced ears has been linked to sacrificial ceremonies. Archaeologists said last week that a bronze statue had been found of a kneeling man carrying a container of liquid on his head. So in other words, we've got another civilization site that they've been excavating from the 1920s, new archaeological evidence. Ancient Gospels in peril of fighting rangers around Ethiopian monastery. All right, then we'll get to the end of these. Ancient Gospels. For centuries, devoted monks have spared them from invaders, fire, and looting armies, but fears are growing that one of the Christian world's greatest treasures, held for more than 1,500 years in northern Ethiopia, may not have survived the latest threat. Oh my God! The vivid illustration of the Garima Gospels, written on goatskin and carbon dated to between AD 330 and 650, are housed in an area that has been under siege for months by the armies of Ethiopia and neighbouring Eritrea. Neighbouring religious sites have been shelled or burnt and precious artefacts plundered. They genuinely are priceless, not just in monetary value, but in their significance to Christianity. It would be a travesty if the Gospels were removed from their ancient homeland, got into private hands, or were destroyed. The monasteries where they are held is in the centre of the fighting. The monks caring for them have managed to keep them safe for all these centuries, and we can only hope that they can do so again. Oh my God. Medieval monks were in the habit of forgery. Here we go. Forgery of documents by monks was rife in medieval England. Surprise, surprise! As monasteries faked old charters of rulers such as Edward the Confessor to stop kings, nobles, and rival clerics seizing their lands. And we say that about lots of charters that are held in Wales, that they were faked by the Normans to obviously disenfranchise people of our country from their own land. And that's nothing new. But lots of documents forged, including anything to do with King Arthur. And graveyard of the executed Roman army farm slaves. I'll do that after the break in connection with that thing that Kathy said. And Emperor's head is, interesting enough, I didn't know about this. We'll show this quickly. Head of Marcus Aurelius. This was actually found last year. This is actually from Rydale up in Yorkshire, and was auctioned for £185,000. That sort of head of Marcus Aurelius, found last year. Didn't even know it existed. Beautiful bust. It's only about 6 inches tall, but as important as the bust of Claudius, it was found in the River Medway, which is a very famous one, which I now believe is the head of Nero. So that there. And finally, now we're going to have break after this. One last thing. Lifetime collection of Anglo-Saxon coins sells for £856,000. So an unparalleled 70-year collection of Anglo-Saxon coins has now been placed on sale. 576 coins, and some of these coins going up for nearly £40,000. And these are all an Anglo-Saxon collection, a personal Anglo-Saxon collection, going up for auction. And that's what that is about there. So what I'm going to do, what I'm going to do is, we're not going to do Keith's lot of articles this week, because that'd be a bit too much. And one last thing I'll just mention. Here we go. It's now believed that Pliny the Elder did manage to get to Stabe, and some of his soldiers managed to get to Herculaneum when Vesuvius went up on the 24th of August in the year 79 AD. But and people were actually in a queue to get on vessels, but because the gas overcame people, they didn't manage to get on the vessels. The vessels sank, and so the rescue mission that was sent out by Pliny the Elder, who actually died on the beach at Stabe, we found his body. It just failed by moments in saving hundreds of people from Herculaneum, which is a bit of tragedy. So some people from Herculaneum nearly survived, but they just didn't get away in time. Interesting enough, they found the remains of a soldier with a backpack and a little dagger, and it was probably from a Praetorian guard who had been sent to rescue them. He died as well. So yeah, we've done questions. My God, that must have been a mega one today. I've not done that long in such a long time. I must have been really into it today. I'm going to suffer for this afterwards. Yes, an hour and 20 minutes non-stop. So break. Jane, are you going to stay for the natter?
No, I'm going to go now.
Jane, glorious Jane, you know what's happening next week. And darling, we'll see you soon, and then we won't see you for a few weeks. Take care,
Jane.
Okay, then.
Bye.
Take care, Jane. Bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye. Break. Do you know that's that song, isn't there? Do you ever remember that sort of pseudo-adult cartoon series from the late 70s, 80s that was called Glorious Jane? And she would be an investigator, right? And there'd be like cartoon strips coming on the screen, and you'd go, Jane, Glorious Jane. There'd be this song singing, and there'd be this Jane. She would be peering through keyholes to try and investigate murders and stuff. Anyone remember that?
Oh,
Right, I'm going. I'll see you in a minute.
Coffee break. Get on with your shekels.
Right, okay. I mentioned before the break, I mentioned graveyard of the executed Roman army farm slaves. a Roman burial site in Cambridgeshire where a third of graves are of beheaded people may have served as a state-run grain farm where slaves or forced labourers suffered extreme justice, archaeologists say. Out of the 52 burials uncovered at Knob End's farm in Summerham, 7 were decapitated. It's spelled K. Knob End's farm with not knobs, Knob End with a K. Knob End's farm.
You're joking.
I'm not.
Oh, come on, Carl.
There it is. There, Knob End, Knob. Anyway, 70 were decapitated and 13 were buried face down. In 10 cases where in other words, what they're saying is this is obviously evidence of slavery, right? But the problem is, if this find was made 10 years ago, they would be saying something completely different. Now, I'm not doing any more of that because Goff is getting excited about Knob End. And what I'm going to look, I can't make this stuff up. No, I'm definitely not making this up either. Shackled, not shekels. Shackled skeleton may be first direct evidence of slavery in Roman Britain. There you go. Iron fetters around the skeleton's ankles were secured to the center with a padlock. Now, padlocks were really valuable things in the Roman world. Iron was fairly valuable, and it's saying a man who died in Roman Britain more than 1,500 years ago was buried wearing padlock iron shackles securing his ankles, and his burial is perhaps the best candidate for the remains of an enslaved person in England when the land was under Roman control. Absolute poppycock. Construction workers discovered the headless skeleton in 2015, and now they're telling us about it now. It's quite interesting. The news is coming out now because we've got this thing about slavery and wokeness and all the rest of it. Everyone's got to be enslaved. Archaeologists who recently analysed the remains suspect that someone buried the man's corpse in shackles to demean him, and perhaps even to indicate that the man was enslaved. I tell you, if you found somebody in shackles now, it would be part of a bondage ritual, wouldn't it? While written records show that slavery was practiced throughout the Roman Empire, slavery throughout the Roman Empire, 90% of all references to do with slavery in the Roman Empire were to do with people who were never in shackles or anything. Archaeologists have only rarely found direct evidence of enslavement, and this is the first burial from Roman era Britain to include a skeleton still wearing iron ankle restraints. Well, the thing is, the lock would have been very valuable, and all you need to do is cut the legs off, and you need to remove this. If it was a slave, that's what you would have done. That's what I would have done anyway. While it's impossible to tell if the man wore these shackles in life, whoever buried him in fetters did so to declare their dominance over the deceased. Nonsense. The study. Right, okay, let's move on. Anyway, so let's get to where I wanted to be. Right, let's just get straight down to the undies, proverbial. Right. By the way, Keith, make sure I have them back next week. Obviously, more of these cuneiform tablets, and I want to do the last bit today. Cuneiform there, and there is our leader, Shimri Lim, and we're going to go to this. So this itself. Goff is going to complain at the end. He really liked the first bit because there were lots of images. The next bit there wasn't many images. And there isn't many images in the next bit, I've got to be honest with you. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to just go with the flow on this one. So here we go. The king, interesting enough, the king who ordered a quarantine to flatten the curve nearly 4,000 years ago. So as we've already worked out, little was known about the mystery disease that was ravaging the ancient kingdom of Mari. Now we've learnt about Mari, we know where it was, we know who lived there. So let's go into this bit. But King Zimri Lim knew the key to stopping this outbreak. It was social distancing. And here goes the story now. Basically what this is a narrative based on the cuneiform tablets. So you can imagine there's a guy running down the corridor and he goes, "My lord!" The call echoed down the long hallway, accompanied by the sounds of wheezing breaths and sandals slapping against the floor. Zimri Lim, king of Mari, exhaled gustily. He had recently embarked on his royal tour of the kingdom. Just an hour earlier, he had marched through the city walls of Tekka with his entourage. He had barely even had a chance to offer sacrifices to Dagan, a patron god of the city. But as he took a deep sip from his goblet and exhaled gustily, he turned to see the messenger hurtling through the door and gone. The man presented his forehead to the ground. No, he didn't go Ali Akbar, but you can imagine. He said, good old leader. He's spread out on the floor. Here we go. Clutching in one hand 2 clay tablets. How can you clutch 2 clay tablets in one hand? Yeah, here we go. Both crammed full of angular cuneiform script, like the one you've got in front of you. Zimri Lim glanced down. Yes! And the messenger, as we're getting from the cuneiform tablets, this is from the cuneiform, okay? Queen Siptu sent me. The man rocked back onto his heels and met Zimri Lim's eyes. My king, there is Simum in the palace. Simum, what's Simum? Well, Zimri Lim knew what Simum was. Simum. Zimri Lim took a deep breath. Anyone who fell ill with simum, a mysterious disease that could leave seeping sores upon the skin, had offended the gods, had offended the gods and was struck down by the divine. You have been struck down by the divine, my son Keith, for having seeping sores. Oh, sorry, Keith. I just thought I'd put that in there. And the victim's own cursed touch could spread to others, sickening them. So in other words, they were learning this from the cuneiform tablets. So in other words, there was this mystery disease called simum. If you were touched by somebody, you could end up with this sickening disease, right? So Zimri Lim knew this. He knew instantly that simum was the sign of great disaster unless he did something. So that basically means that there may have been another outbreak a few years earlier, either in his reign or in an earlier reign. We'll talk about that in a moment. So this simum, obviously somebody who offended the gods, had been struck down, and the touch was fatal. And the king croaked, who? 2 women, the messenger said. He began to read, and this is from his wife, Siptu, the cuneiform, as it reads. Your servant, the maid of Hisutum, filled up with the punishment of the god, and I evicted that woman from the palace. Senior cantors, which are like magistrates, must come and cleanse the palace. Well, when I say there's probably a different translation there, but senior cantors or senior officials must come and cleanse the place. So this is Siptu. She was wise. She knew in this cuneiform tablet, the first one we're talking about, cuneiform tablet in a letter to her king. Zimri Lim expelled a harsh breath and nodded. The messenger brandished the other tablet and continued. Obviously, here you go. The first is called Atuzar. Atuzar has been evicted from the palace. She is now gone. The second is Astaka. Now, at that moment, we see a reaction from the king. Zimri Lim's heart plummeted. He felt his hand trembling as he fingered the pendant at his neck, carved from lapis lazuli and adorned with a golden lion with the wings of an eagle. It was a gift from the king of Ur. And how do we know that? That's in the cuneiform. That's written down as well. So we know we had that pendant, and we know it's a gift from the king of Ur. That's great. We've got that detail. He often visited the women's quarters. Zimri Lim often visited the women's quarters, where his non-popular wives, because Siptu was his popular wife, and concubines resided. What if the god's wrath could now be in him, on him, possessing him? What if Dagon, the great god, grew angry with him, despite all his prayers, offering and sacrifices? He knew there were no scars or oozing open wounds on his body, but still he might be infected. So in other words, he's had some shenanigans with Astakar, and now he's worried that as he's touched the woman, he might be down with the same illness. What does the queen plan to do with Astakar? Zimri Lim muttered to himself. And carry on with the cuneiform. The cuneiform text says as follows: right now I have made her dwell in the new quarters. The messenger recited from Shiptu's tablet. Table and meal have been separated. Nobody will go near her bed or chair. Zimri would have heaved a sigh of relief. Born a princess in her own right, his savvy wife knew her duty. Shiptu knew her duty. The sick woman must be shut away, her possessions sequestered, to prevent Dagon's fury from spreading. Astakar now resides in an unused building, my lord, Shiptu goes on to say. The messenger continued, her quarters will be cleansed. What message shall I take back to the queen? The messenger asked. Striding out into the hallway, the king called back over his shoulder, tell her to continue her efforts. Burn everything belonging to them both. So in other words, that was in another cuneiform tablet, instructing his good wife to continue her efforts. Burn everything belonging to them both. So in other words, get rid of, just cleanse, just get on with it. Now, this is back to me, and I know some of us have had the COVID virus. I've got long COVID, and it was that moment actually getting COVID. It was frantically checking my own condition against the known symptoms of a contagious disease. And to all of us, this would sound very similar to the world that we live in today. And this very type of panic once consumed the ancient realm of Mari, located in the northeast of what is now Syria. Mari was one of the most prosperous city-states of that period, over 3,700 years ago. Its greatest king in history, Zimri Lim, extended Mari's sphere of influence by military and marital alliances, built an architectural marvel in his grand palace, and kept the peace along his trade routes. Zimri Lim. Zimri Lim also preserved its military, diplomatic and personal correspondence in a massive archive. And this is a question that we had earlier on. Where were most of these kept? I said most of them were kept in a big sort of library, but others found in other rooms. So we've got 25,000 of these, written mostly in a form of cuneiform known as Akkadian, the diplomatic language of the day, mostly excavated in the 1930s. A number of these letters dealt with the spread and subsequent containment of Simum. This is how it described the Simum. Zimri Lim and his chief wife, Shiptu, exchanged correspondence about how to stop the sickness afflicting their courtiers from spreading. So let's try and do something about this. Of course, some of the detail in the scene of what we discussed is assumed. We can't know exactly what the king said or did at any moment in time, but 4,000 years ago, nearly 4,000 years ago, this was very real. And we don't know Astakar's exact role in the court before and after she was placed in isolation, and if she survived or not. But the crux of the story is told in these surviving ancient tablets, an actual book of evidence. And the pendant is actually mentioned is mentioned in a cuneiform text as well. According to Assyriologist or Assyriologist, Assyriologist is like an archaeologist, or Assyriologist just does Assyrian Mesopotamian archaeology. He says that Simum, best translated as a lesion, may refer to a contagious skin condition. Simum could serve as a label for multiple related illnesses and a metonym for such illnesses and their symptoms. The Mesopotamians might not have understood contagion in the sense of transmission of germs, but they knew it could spread. They knew they had to do something. You know, you've got the rafts of ancient Egypt. You've got the pox of ancient Egypt as one of the great plagues, and you know, it just spread. We don't hear about stopping the Great Plague spreading across Europe, but it stopped here. He stops it. Between Siptu and Zimri Lim, they stop this spreading. A bit like the effectiveness of the Chinese, which has to be admired last year. It's interesting that even though the mechanism for the spread of contagious disease was understood differently in Mari than it is today, the fact that a disease could be contagious was recognized. So they understood about contagion. Could they not have known about the germs themselves? And the Mesopotamians also knew the way to stop the spread of the disease was by isolating the people who had it. In his correspondence, Zimri Lim discussed how to handle sick women in his palace and others alike, and how to stop them from infecting others. Saving the majority necessitated sacrificing the few, casting out those ill with the gods' fury from their chambers, or in some cases from the palace entirely. Zimri Lim was a Captain Spock of 3,700 odd years ago, right? Captain Spock would say, I don't know which one it was, and it was a genesis of Captain Spock or something in the film, where the famous thing as he's dying, he says, the good of the many outweighs the good of the one. Zimri Lim knew this. He did. In one letter, the cuneiform, in one of the cuneiform tablets, the king ranted that he heard rumors of a woman known as Nana, who had fallen ill with Simum. Rather than isolate herself, he was disgusted by this. Nana still frequented the palace and mingled with the other women residing there. And he raged in the cuneiform. This woman will infect many other women. And he defined this as contagious. So these much wiser people and our own politicians knew a lot more back then than we gave them credit for. If the Mesopotamians, this is a point I've already made, the Mesopotamians did not understand the disease's transmission in terms of germs, then how did they comprehend its spread? Presumably because they had seen it happen before. So Zimri Lim and Shiptu were so wise that they had learnt, unlike our own silly politicians. It goes on to say, as we move up, as Mesopotamian historian Edward Neufeld observed in an essay in 1986, Zimri Lim's instructions are a matter of fact. He knew. He knew how to deal with it. He was panicking, but he knew how to deal with it. He'd seen it before. And contained no explanation, which implies the spread of such diseases and measures to contain it were already well known. This thing would happen on a regular basis. Just because this is the earliest reference to contagious disease doesn't mean it was the first time such an incident was observed. In fact, far from it. It's said that Galen, when he's writing about the great outbreak in the reign of Marcus Aurelius in the year 165, Galen first wrote about a Roman outbreak. But this outbreak was what we're talking about 2,000 years earlier. Zimri Lim's letter also provide the first verifiable and veritable evidence of enforced quarantine. He likely based his orders upon seeing this method work in the past. In another missive to Siptu, Zimri Lim provided more orders regarding yet another woman who was ill with Simum. In this case, Zimri Lim ordered Siptu to sequester this lady, to incarcerate her, and who had been named as woman Sumundum, the woman with the contagion. This woman should go stay in one separate building, and nobody should go in to see her, the king wrote. If no separate building was available, another room so far away from the rest of the royal women as possible would be the best option. Distance was key, he explained, to containing this outbreak. Now, he said something that our politicians did not dare to mention. Whether she dies or lives, in either case, other women might come down with that simum. May just this one single woman die and nobody else. By containing it is key. Allow people to die who have got the disease and save the rest of us from the outbreak. That's something our own politicians did not dare to say. In his letter regarding the woman named Nanan, the king noted that not only was she banned from socializing with the other ladies of the palace, but everything that she had touched must be avoided as well. The queen wrote to her husband. They had 8 daughters together. And actually, back then, having daughters was a good idea because you could sort of get them to marry off other kings in different kingdoms. And, you know, that's a great thing. Give strict orders that no one drink from the cup she uses. The king wrote to his queen. And no one sit on the seat on which she sits. And no one lie on the bed on which she lies. Cuneiform text. So that it should not affect many women. And, you know, this is done with great wisdom and great knowledge. These items would need to be ritually purified before they could be used again, undergoing a sort of spiritual disinfecting as well as a physical actual disinfecting as well. It seems, though, that the spreading of the illness could not be easily stopped. In one letter to the king a little bit later, the author wrote of the increasing number of sick people, lamenting, "I am afraid they will infect the land, all of it." Another letter from the archive directed to Zimri Lim's predecessor. Now, this is rather interesting, is it not? And you know how we know there'd been another outbreak? The cuneiform texts tell us. So the predecessor of Zimri Lim, Yasmu Adu, recalls that the city of Dunun had been stricken with illness and refers to a corpse heap in the city. Sounds very similar to India, doesn't it? As it has been very recently. Within 2 days, about 20 men of the troops died, adding that the citizens of Dinum left the city and went to the mountain of Lakwusum, a more isolated location, not unlike people fleeing New York City and other dense virus hotspots last year, I would say. Does that sound similar to London? And we get loads of people from London into Wales and Cornwall, you know? Was that the right thing to do? Zimri Lim said no. He had learnt from this previous episode. And in Zimri Lim's reign, he was able to contain the virus much more effectively than had been done by his predecessor, Yasma. In other words, if you've got a whole city with a virus, they had to be contained in that city and not allowed to leave. Exactly the same as the Chinese did. And how effective was that? Only 5,000 deaths in China. And what have we had to put up with? His surviving letters do not record the exact number of casualties from this epidemic, but at some point Simum ceased to be mentioned in his correspondence with Queen Siptu, which makes historians believe that he effectively flattened the curve and was able to lift the quarantine. And finally, we'll show 2 more images, I think. Today's pandemic is hardly the first time humans have found themselves in such a situation. How we deal with it is another thing. Ancient history shows that the key to survival is quarantining, social distancing, and being willing to play the waiting game. And we didn't do that. If we had learned from this, we could have saved many tens of thousands of lives. And then finally, what I'd like to do is, if we can go looking at these again, that's the great King Zimri Lim, and showing some more of the great leaders. And notice if you could see there, that they got the typical Assyrian beard, which is typical Mesopotamian as well. And this wonderful figure. This wonderful figure, as we'll finish with this one. I deliberately chose this one for 2 reasons. It's a clay statue of a smiling worship are dating from well before the reign of Zimri Lim. It was discovered in 2009 among a cache of statues buried under a stair in an early period temple from the Kingdom of Mari. Now, this is the reason why we mention this is twofold. This was found in 2009. The French had been excavating there since 1933. Artifacts until 2010, 2011 were still being found. Look at the amount of archaeology that's been taken from this site since. And all I'd like to say is, whether you've agreed or disagreed in my interpretation is up to you. But what I'd like to say is that I don't think you can deny this, that the history and archaeology of our planet is a shared history. It's a history and archaeology that we can learn from. And again, if we ignore history, the cost is as we have seen last year. We ignored this outbreak and how it was dealt with, and unfortunately, we're doomed to repeat past mistakes if we don't learn from the past. On that note, let's finish. Let's ask if there's any questions. Questions, please. Let's have them from Keith.
No, I think I agree with what you're saying. If we forget history, it's at our peril, really, isn't it? I think that's the lesson we should always learn from history. But no, I've never heard of this place before, and it's very interesting. Hopefully, there's still archaeology under the ground, which they will discover in the future, and bring some of these places back.
And the thing is, what we did the other week, we looked at the archaeological evidence that we looked at from the South American culture, and we that was the the Mauche people. We looked at the Mauche people, and we saw the site being extensively looted, but the best archaeology hadn't been touched. And I see your sentiment. I completely agree with you. Yes, Keith. Not Keith. Goff.
That's me.
No, it's very interesting. Thank you very much.
Goff, you, me, and the boys next week will have a man-on-man session, right? And next week, Jessica will be doing the same. She will be looking at the early medieval period again, and there's talk of Vikings.
Ooh.
So anyway, what about you, Algernon?
No, very interesting. Not many questions.
Not many questions, so there are a few.
I take it we now await sort of, I don't know, comments that because of this link between the Romans and the slaves, etc., that we're going to have to get rid of all our Roman artifacts and dig up all the pillars and what have you. The thing is, we've got to demolish Chedworth because it's to do with slavery. All Roman artifacts need to be buried. The Roman amphitheatre at Killeen needs to be demolished, and that's what we need to do, because it's all relating to slavery. That's correct, So in other words, why don't we erase our history completely, and then we'll be fine. Actually, therefore, we're not doing any more history archaeology classes because we've got nothing to learn from the past, and that's the way we do it.
So ISIS was right then, really. Start from day one.
Yeah, and in fact, all the artifacts that you've got in your house, Keith, you've now got to get rid of.
Yeah.
You've got to melt them down because they're irrelevant.
I'll bury them in the garden.
No, you've got to get rid of them. Give them all to Steve. He knows what to do with them. Right, and finally, what we're going to do, we're going to talk to the 3 witches at Karen's house. I didn't say bitches, I said witches. Thank you very much. Right.
One thing, Carl, I'd like to mention: if there was no evidence of mass graves, Oh God!
Right.
Yeah. So if there's no evidence of mass graves from a pandemic, right? Perhaps Shittu was just jealous of her husband bonking other women and just got them sort of disposed of.
Well, he did. We do see references of other people dying, but that's so cynical. That is. Anything else? Anything you want to say, Kathy the witch?
Anything you wish to say, Kathy?
No, thank you.
She sounded so noble then when I called her a witch. And anything you want to say, Karen? And before we do, I'll just mention one final thing, and then that will call it a day.
Right, no, nothing. I said never heard of the Mari Kingdom before today. Well, last week when you mentioned we were doing it today. So yeah, that was interesting.
I appreciate that. So
obviously, we're in a moment of absolute change with what we're doing, and enjoy Jessica's class next week. I'm sure I'll be seeing you all very soon anyway, because we don't know what's happening out there in the big wide world. You never know. Mark Drakeford might say that we've all got to wear tassels on our trousers and we can't go anywhere for the next 4 months. So other than that, enjoy next week. You all know what's going on. And yet the fail-safe thing, if you can't get next week, then join me, Goff, and a couple of the others, and we'll be good to have you.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much, folks. It's been a pleasure
Cheerio,
today.
everybody.
Bye.
If there's no other questions, see you all next week. Thank you.
Okay.
One more thing.
Bye.
Don't forget to tell Jessica to turn up on time.
Thank you very much.
Does Jessica know how to get there, Carl?
I told her what she needs to do. She needs to get off the train thingamajig. She needs to go past the bus thingamajig doodah, across the parking thingamajig. There's a road doodah effort. She needs to go across the Firkins, and then she needs to go past a medical effort doodah on the left, and she needs to go a quick further up past a crossing effort Firkins, and then there's a little bit of a weird turning down a lane thingy, and then there's a little gate thingy which isn't there. She goes up some steps, and there's a building type hut, and that's where it'll be.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes.
When does the train get in?
Yeah. What time does the train get in?
I do believe it gets in about 20 past, so she will be late.
No, it gets in at train for Bridgend gets in at.
No, she's coming from Cardiff.
All right.
Yes,
So it's about 20
I meant
past
that
then.
the train to Bridgend is
1:15.
I'm trying to desperately think.
They changed the times
It's
recently.
about 20
Yes, I know,
past.
they've
Yeah.
messed
From
about.
Cardiff, it gets in about 20 past the hour, because that's the ones
Yeah.
I've catched to
Yes.
get to the end.
Past 2 going to Cardiff.
But she got lots to carry then.
Well, she's got her she's got her other stuff, you know, like a witchcraft books and a cauldron and all that type of stuff. So she'll have a bit of stuff to carry. Yeah.
Serious? Does she need somebody to get her off the train to help her with stuff?
Actually, it would be nice to meet her off the train, because at least somebody will know where she can go directly without wandering about. Yeah.
Got somebody at the door, so I'll say cheerio.
Okay.
So if somebody can meet her off the train, that'll be really useful.
Well, I'm coming past the station anyway, so I could always.
Okay. Do you want
hang
to
around
meet her
then.
then and bring her?
Have you got room on your broomstick, Kathy?
Kathy's just rolling her eyes at you.
On that note, we'll call it a day, and we'll all see each other whatever way next week.
Have they put them back now?
I don't know. It is slightly different.
What?
Right. Bye, everyone. Then.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, darlings. Don't wear the red dress that I always wear. Bye.
Where's the...
One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Cheerio. Bye-bye.
Hello. I was trying to work out who was here today. So there was Jim.
Yeah.
There was
Karen.
Algernon.
Kathy.
Kathy Witch.
Yep. Jane.
Goff, Keith.
Yep.
Karen. Jane. Yeah, I got all them.
That's about it.
Yeah, that'll do.
Okay. Cheerio then. Bye.
Take care, darling. Bye. See you. Bye-bye. Oh God, I've missed out a fucking week here. Shit, I was last week. Oh God. Anyway, thanks folks for watching, and a bit controversial, but go from there. Thank you.